Two players, two sides. One is light, one is dark. Whoa. You wanna know a secret?
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer. As ever, I am your host. In this podcast, usually we explore the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. But we're bringing you two bonus episodes this week to mark the 20th anniversary of one of my favourite TV shows of all time. Very much horror adjacent as well. A kind of horror, drama, sci-fi, fantasy show, Lost, which ran from 2004 to 2010. 20 years ago this week, the two-part pilot episode dropped, and so many people around the world became utterly obsessed with this show after that 2-hour pilot, including me. So I decided to drop this two-part episode, which we actually made for Patreon last year. So this is from the Patreon archive. I sat down with Lost expert and co-host of the Lost Boys podcast, Jacob Stolworthy, to discuss Lost in depth. We talk about our theories, characters, favourite moments, favourite episodes, least favourite episodes, the kind of rise and fall of the show in popularity. And of course, this discussion ended up being very long. We ended up talking about Lost for nearly 4 hours. So I split the conversation into two separate podcast episodes. In this first part, you're going to hear us talk about the beginning of Lost, seasons 1 to 3. And then in part 2 of our discussion, which I'll drop in the next couple of days, you'll hear the concluding half of our discussion where we talk about Lost seasons 4, 5, and 6, and that very divisive, controversial series finale. So please enjoy our spoilerific discussion of seasons 1 to 3 of Lost. Hello, Jacob Stolworthy. How are you doing?
Hello, hey, how are you doing?
Oh my God, I'm so good. It's been so long since we last had you on the podcast. It's lovely to hear your voice again. How are you?
I'm really well, mate. I'm really happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm really good. I'm excited for this. I mean, like, I've been wanting to nerd out about Lost with you for years now, Jacob. So I've jumped on this opportunity. I'm very excited. On that note, I want to start by having a bone to pick with you, which is that for all of us fans of the Lost Boys podcast,
yes,
what the hell has happened to the Lost Boys? You got as far as recapping up to about, midway through the last season?
Yeah,
and
not
then
even.
You guys haven't released a new episode in ages.
Yeah, it's been mad. So there was a whole... we get daily messages, which is, testament, I guess, to...
That's really nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice, but also I feel like a crippling sense of... I just hate letting people down, and I am every day. But no, I'm happy to say, not to go into the whys of why we stopped, many reasons. However, we are now in the process of stashing up the remaining episodes, and we are well and truly getting stuck in now to the good stuff. We're getting up to the end, and we kind of decided to do it that way because we just didn't want to continually let people down. So one day we're going to release the next episode soon, may I add, and there will be weekly episodes with no breaks. So we're getting there. We're getting there.
Love it. I'm very excited. So for people that don't listen to the Lost Boys and don't know a little bit about you and your kind of past with this show, just start us off by telling me a bit about your relationship with Lost. When did you first kind of fall in love with this show?
So it's mad. I can remember it was like August 2005. So I mean, I'm not good at maths, but we're coming up to an anniversary there.
Yeah, we are.
18 years. It was started on Channel 4, and I don't think I fell in love with it immediately, but I definitely, it with every week, it kind of sunk its claws into me. And I think midway through the season, I think it was episode 19 in particular, where it kind of finished, and bear in mind, I was, 13? I hadn't really watched anything at that time, starting from the beginning anyway, and watching it, following it religiously. And I think that was when I realised what TV can do. And it's funny because I always think maybe if, I know you're a big Buffy fan, maybe if Buffy came along first for me or whatever, maybe that would be the show that I'm obsessed with and I'm doing podcasts about now. But for when it was Lost, I fell in love with it over the course of that first season, and it cemented, its impact on my life with season 2 onwards,
Yeah, I remember very clearly. I'm probably a couple of years older than you, but I remember I was a huge Buffy fan, and I think Buffy at that point had finished, and so had Angel, its spin-off, and there was nothing that I had left on TV at the time that was kind of like really drawing me in on a weekly basis like that. And then we got this incredible pilot episode on Channel 4, right? And I remember, do you remember even the advertising for Lost at the time? The ads were really intriguing and really weird.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, what is this show? And I wasn't like super obsessed with it immediately like you, but it slowly kind of drew me in. And actually, I sort of think I went on the opposite trajectory to some other people, because I know for a lot of people, they kind of dip out of the show as it goes on. I think I kind of fell more and more in love with it, especially around the middle, around seasons 4 and 5 was when I was obsessed with this show, right? But what an exciting kind of opening, what an exciting pilot, and what an exciting kind of premise this show had, right? Such a cool hook.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny because I remember, like you say, the adverts, which were just, specifically done for the UK, which I thought was really cool. They obviously knew it was going to become a global hit. And billboards like peppered around London and stuff, and being like, what is this thing? And it got like the big treatment of it was like, I think they aired the first pilot in between like a Big Brother eviction or something on Channel 4. So, it had an event feel to it. But yeah, the hook is it's something now that you kind of roll your eyes at, you go, oh, it sounds like Lost.
Yes.
But,
people say it as like a dig now, don't they?
I know. He says defeatedly. But it was like it's to die for, really, the plot line, and it actually amazes me that they managed to reach a conclusion that it was on their terms,
right?
Because say I'd started watching Heroes, having my first show. Imagine like how underwhelming that would have been. But the premise. Indelible.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the premise, shall we? Because I think that in itself is interesting. Usually I would start every conversation with a kind of rough plot synopsis, but I think the story of Lost shifts and changes, and Lost is different things to different people, right? Is it a desert island show about people that are shipwrecked and they have to go home? Is it about religion? Is it about science versus faith? Is it about parent issues? Is it about flawed men? Is it about supernatural evil or electromagnetic time travel? There are 1,000,001 things, right, this show could be quote unquote about. What is it to you, Jacob? What is Lost all about for you?
I think Lost represents something that I just, every time I watch a show which is kind of similar, I'm like, oh, I do love shows like this. And that is extraordinary things happening to ordinary people. I think that at its heart is what Lost is. And I think with that knowledge, for me, wherever Lost went, whether it went sci-fi, supernatural, what I was kind of stilled and ready for that. So for me, that's essentially what the show is about. Yeah. And obviously it becomes a lot more than just extraordinary things. It becomes the battle of good versus evil and everything, and in between, which I'm into as well. But like for me, at its crux, it's just ordinary people being thrust into the extraordinary and seeing what happens. I
love that. I think that's a really interesting thing, and I think it goes so bananas. And I think different people were invested in the show for different reasons, right? I think that like you're either in it for the plot and for the mystery, and you want to know what's going on with the numbers and the monsters, and you want answers, or you're watching it for the characters and the backstories and the relationships, and it's interesting. And I think like season 1 gets such a perfect balance of all those things, doesn't it? And then it kind of goes off in kind of a little bit more plot heavy at times, or a little bit more character heavy at times, and I think that's where people started to become a bit divided, didn't they? I think as the show went on a bit.
I think the thing is, like, for a network TV show that has 24 episodes, whatever, to fulfill, you can't, the first season you can kind of get away with making it character based, which is still quite a bold thing for a network TV show to have done, to zone in on all these different characters with different cultures and backgrounds and whatnot. But by season 2, I guess you do kind of have to, throw the spotlight onto the mystery side a bit more, and you are gonna you are going to divide audiences when you throw in like swirling black smoke monsters and whatnot.
I love it. I love it. And I was obsessed with all of that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And we'll get to all of that as we go on. But like, it's interesting what you mentioned there about this being a network television show, 24 episodes. This feels like a kind of bygone era of television in a weird way, right? Because things have changed so much, and I think they've partly changed due to Lost and Lost's legacy. So we're going to talk about that as we go. But just to remind people, I mean, this show started in 2004. It was made for the ABC network, right? So this was a network television. At the time, we had shows on channels like HBO, right? And HBO was always considered a little bit different. We'd had shows like The Sopranos at this point were going, and 6 Feet Under and Sex and the City. They were glossier, they were higher budget, they were more cinematic, quote unquote, right? And they also had shorter seasons. They were more kind of contained storylines in a way, right? Whereas network television, you'd think of kind of the big shows like Buffy and X-Files, or comedy shows like Friends or Frasier or whatever. These shows that would have 24 episodes in a season, they would just go on and on and on and on. Lost was part of that tradition at this point, but it was during a kind of period of change in that regard, right? Jacob, what do you think is Lost's legacy and influence on the kind of the way television is today in the age of streaming and kind of these, television shows almost being like kind of 10-hour films in comparison, right?
Absolutely. Like 10 episodes and like meaty hour-long episodes of whatnot.
Yeah.
I'm in two minds about it. So firstly, I think it served the purpose for what Lost could show it could be. And I think Lost probably wouldn't have worked had it been like the 10 to 12 episode kind of more prestige-y HBO style of TV. I think it worked that this was a network show and that you did have many episodes to explore the many characters and introduce way more and whatnot. And I think as it went on, it just couldn't sustain that because, like you say, it becomes very mystery based, and I think patience would have worn thin even for the most diehard fan.
Yeah.
Which is why I know we're going to talk about the later seasons as we go on, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions around the middle seasons of Lost. Like you say, they're your favourites, and I think a lot of people might be surprised, more casual fans who didn't finish it, going, "What? It was still good in season 4 and 5." You're like, no, actually, it was probably better than it had ever been.
Yeah.
Now though, I love watching, going back, like I watched Buffy and Angel for the first time in lockdown, and it was so great to just have that commitment of, okay, this is a lot of episodes of television, but I'm going to do it. Yeah. However, I do feel now that a lot of people who I recommend Lost to, who are like, okay, do you know what? I've got to tick it off. They lose patience. They lose patience, and because they binge it, right? They binge 8 episodes. That's not how we experienced Lost. I don't love Lost as much as I do because I binged it. Right. I love it because I waited a week for episodes.
Yeah. And I think I've talked about this a lot recently. There is an art to television of this era, the Buffys and Losts and X-Files, these shows that I feel like we've lost this idea of creating an episode of television that has a beginning, middle, and end, right? Like these days, the Netflix model where a season of television is just a 10-hour movie, right? You're never going to remember what happens in episode 4, what happens in episode 7. Like it's basically just been divided up into hour chunks, right? Whereas this had this kind of the room to breathe where you'd watch an hour or 45 minutes per week. And it's like, oh, this week, Hurley's going to create a golf course. Or this week, it's going to be this little adventure, right? And that thing that Buffy does so well and Lost does so well, which is like, it will push a greater narrative on, but also it will give you a nice little story of the week. And I think that's an underrated kind of trait of television that we've kind of lost now a little bit, it feels like.
I love that you said that because that echoes my thoughts and concerns greatly. Netflix especially, Stranger Things, I think the show has peaks and it has good moments, but they're very few and far between, and like you say, I can't really differentiate between many episodes apart from the big ones. Not just Stranger Things, I'm name checking that unfairly. There's a lot of shows like that where you think that the first 4 episodes of that were great, but it could have been 2 or whatever.
Absolutely.
But Lost, like you say, over the course of like one season of 24 episodes, you could probably remember every episode because of, like you say, some fun little character moment or fun little side storyline that happened, which is, I think writers had to be more inventive and consistently creative. back then than they do now.
Yeah, and I guess there's also that feeling of rolling with the, like, making changes as they go as well, I think, right? Like, you do get the feeling there's something more organic about it, where they were responding to how audiences were reacting to certain episodes and certain storylines, and circumstances would change, and so storylines would change, right? Whereas again, these days you kind of get the feeling like it's been planned out. They're going to film all 10 episodes in one go and release them in one bulk, right? So there is something a little bit more messy maybe, but organic about the way in which Lost, that story was told, you know, which is kind of fascinating.
It just adds to the immersion as well. Yeah. And like seeing the discussions you've been reading online kind of mirrored on screen then, or addressed on screen in their subtle ways. That's something I've not really thought about, but that is going to be something that people who watch Lost now won't really even understand the nuances of what that was like to experience. And that is quite a sad prospect, actually.
And I think it now is thought of as a very divisive show, right? Obviously, it was a massive deal, especially in the first couple of seasons. Everyone watched it. Then certain people sort of trickled out. People have very different opinions on the ending, whether it was a good ending or a bad ending. Nowadays, I think you know, like you said, you mentioned Lost to somebody, they're either going to go, "Oh, I loved that show," or they'll roll their eyes and think of it as this awful, frustrating show, right? Why do you think that is? Why does it have that reputation?
I think there are many misconceptions around us, and I always go on about misconceptions, and I always try and play the devil's advocate and be like, okay, can I understand where some of these misconceptions generate from? And I really can. The thing is, like, Lost isn't for everyone, but it because of the nature of what the show is and how the show kind of delved into the, you know, I'm going to say ridiculous. It did it in impressive ways, but it was quite ridiculous at times. It makes it easy to be a bit of a punching bag and to be spoofed, essentially. So I think it's very easy for people who didn't watch Lost to just write it off as a show that outstayed its welcome, that was made up as it went along, that had a polar bear. I mean, people love to say that, don't they? And without ever really exploring Lost or thinking it had anything more to say than the fact it had a polar bear on an island. So all of that definitely contributed. And then I think what didn't help was I say the final season, but I think probably the final episode. But there are like a ton of reasons. I could talk for hours about people's opinion on the finale. And do you know what the real testament to the fact that I actually think a lot of the criticism of the finale might be a tad misplaced is the fact that a lot of people who have rewatched the show have said to me, wow, the ending was actually brilliant. Like, so many people who hated the ending are now going, I was so wrong. I got caught up in the wave of, I don't know, expectation, or there was this whole thing. I don't know if you know about when they broadcast the finale and they, over the end credits, they kind of added some stock archival footage. ABC added it in without telling Damon Lindelof, Carlton Cuse. And it kind of led people at home to believe something incorrect about the finale. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about.
We can spoil.
You know, that they were dead all along, which is really this misconception that has kind of pervaded the legacy of the show, which is incorrect. That's not the read. So that it was inspired by something that was out of the creator's control, and they were literally at the premiere. I spoke to them about this. They're at the premiere, standing up, like hands on head, despairing, going, "What have they done? This is going to create the wrong message," and it did, and it essentially ruined the legacy of their show. Because people who don't even watch it always go, "Oh, they were dead all along."
Yes,
they were dead all along,
and and I think there's this. For me, I think the ending is brilliant, but I think the last season is weak, and I think that's the other disparity, right? That there is, for me at least, and I know quite a few people probably do think season 6 might be the worst of the 6, and I think I agree with that, and I think they nailed the finale, but they didn't so much nail the whole of the last season as an ending. Do you know what I mean? Which is also a shame.
I think that is a completely fair comment, and I would agree that season 6 is probably my least favourite of all the seasons. I find I have to work harder to find things that I love about it, which is, you know, that's in a nutshell basically what you were saying, I think. But I agree with you that the finale is magnificent.
Magnificent, absolutely. So let's get into it. We've got so much ground to cover, Jacob. This is ambitious doing all of this in a single chat, I think. But let's try and hurtle into Lost. So we're going to begin by talking about Season 1. So Season 1, Episode 1 begins with a close-up of a man's eye opening, this iconic shot as we zoom out and reveal that it is our main character, Jack Shepherd, played by Matthew Fox. He wakes up, not knowing where he is or what's going on. He's in a mysterious jungle. When he stands up, he stumbles out of the jungle onto a beach, and it is there revealed that there is a plane wreckage. There are kind of bits of debris everywhere. People are screaming, people are dying, there are injured people all over the place. So it transpires that Jack was on a flight 815 Oceanic, which was flying from Sydney to Los Angeles and has crash landed on a mysterious unknown island. And so Season 1 then follows the first 20-ish days of these survivors having to live on this island and figuring out how they can get home. We meet a whole bunch of characters, all of our survivors. They all have kind of different secrets and different backstories. The backstories are revealed through flashbacks, so each episode focuses on a different character. And meanwhile, in the present day, our group of survivors are struggling to live on this island, and they're working out how they can get food, how they can build a camp, who's going to be in charge, who gets to be in charge of the weapons, and various other things occur throughout Season 1. Also, this island is very strange. There are mysterious, unexplainable things going on this island. There seems to be some kind of giant monster lurking in the jungle, which is eating people. There are also sort of strange supernatural properties about this island. One character, who was previously in a wheelchair, unable to walk, can now miraculously walk. And there are these other people on the island that seem to appear every now and then, who seem to be native to the island. They are just known as the Others, and we don't know for sure what their MO is or whether they are good or hostile. So there are loads and loads of mysteries that happen throughout Season 1, and while all this is happening, we are finding out a bit about our characters and their relationships to each other. But Jacob, I want to start off by just asking you about that historic pilot episode. I actually revisited the pilot this morning before we recorded.
Yeah.
I still think it's one of the most impressive kind of 2-hour pilot episodes and opening to a show I've ever seen, right? But it is so impressive, the way that it has the action, the direction, all of the characters it juggles, all of the mysteries, the story beats, right? It's pretty masterfully done, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, and I think it's really emblematic of Season 1 in general, of what this is going to be, right? Which is quite an expensive show, when we need it to be, but also we don't skimp on the character. And my God, there are the introductions of some of those characters are so brilliant. And
yes,
I get nostalgic now thinking, when I watch other shows and I'm 4 episodes in and I'm I can't remember a single character's name here.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in Lost, you instantly just remember. They're so well defined. Almost immediately. And like you say, the action elements, there's, it's exhilarating, it's spooky, it's just tense. It kind of traverses a lot of genres over the two-parter, actually.
It does, actually, doesn't it? And that's the other thing I haven't asked you yet, but the horror of Lost, too. Because obviously this is a show that almost defies genre. It doesn't... Totally. We'll talk about this as we go, because it moves from being a kind of mystery show to a sci-fi to supernatural. But there are... I would say this show is littered with moments of horror all the way throughout, right? From the pilot all the way through to the ending. There are certain moments that I will always remember as being truly frightening, but also this whole setup of the pilot feels a bit like some sort of monster movie or something, right? You washed up on an island and there is some big monster in the jungle eating people, essentially. At least that's what it appears to be in the pilot. Yeah,
you see the trees being torn down, and there's all this, and then you see it's quite gruesome when you see the body of the pilot completely torn apart by whatever it is. And I think there is crash landing on an island, there's got to be something in the jungle, right? That's right. Dangerous. And I think that what they do is they kind of, I don't want to say they buck expectation. It's more like they lean in to what could be otherwise quite eye-rollingly obvious. And they find inventive ways of presenting that. And I think, like you say, they kind of eke out. It's almost quite Steven Spielbergian, the way, it is like a Jurassic Park feel almost to...
Definitely.
I
think a lot of us thought, I remember thinking as a kid, is that a dinosaur in the jungle?
Right.
You know, when you see the trees move and the noise it makes almost sounds a bit like a T-Rex, like, and the thing coming swooping down from above to eat people, this kind of, we don't know what this monster is at this point, right? I thought, are we in some sort of like King Kong Skull Island type of place where there are dinosaurs and creatures and stuff?
I think even Hurley says in one of the early episodes, he says, there's dinosaurs, and Jack's like, no, they're extinct, like, you know.
Yeah.
And even then, that was like kind of like a knowing rib at what the audience might have thought and stuff, which is fun.
Right.
But yeah, no, like completely like affecting in conveying the chills and the horror early on.
And of course, J.J. Abrams, he directed the pilot, right? Is that right? He did. And how much was his... Because obviously this show is mainly, you know, nowadays we all think of it as Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof that kind of created this show, right? But J.J. Abrams was quite heavily involved at the beginning, right?
Early stages, yeah, absolutely. He was instrumental, really, all throughout that first season. And then I think, like, he was there, like, kind of helping out. And then handed over to Damon and Carlton for season 2. But I think I think J.J. Abrams these days, maybe because of people assuming his involvement with Lost lasted the whole way through, but he's a controversial figure, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of people lose faith when they see his name attached now, whereas back then it was a signal that it was like a show or a film to be really excited about. Very secretive, something like an event show to be watched. And
well, he sort of created the mystery box idea, didn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which obviously just like, I mean, even now whenever I watch anything with remotely like this remote suggestion of a mystery box storyline, it always reminds me of how Lost didn't just introduce it, but they kind of like mentioned it like head on, like when Ben says imagine a box, and I just love that they were like, yeah, let's take JJ's mystery box idea and let's turn it into like an actual thing that the characters reference.
Yeah, make it literal.
So funny. Yeah.
Picture a box. You know something about boxes, don't you, John? What if I told you that somewhere on this island there's a very large box, and whatever you imagined, whatever you wanted to be in it, when you opened that box, there it would be. What would you say about that, John?
J.J. Abrams, for all of his faults, he's brilliant at setting up a plot, like setting up a mystery, I feel like, right? He's maybe not always, arguably not always great at resolving them, but he is very, very good at that kind of hook.
Absolutely.
It's similar to Twin Peaks. I mean, obviously Twin Peaks, I think, influenced Lost, didn't it? And I think,
style.
Twin Peaks having that incredible mystery at the beginning of it that had everyone talking like kind of water cooler television, right? That then maybe didn't end in the most satisfying way. It had a similar trajectory to Lost for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, I think it definitely did. And I think Damon Lindelof especially was a big Twin Peaks fan as well, so that's why it kind of continues the feel of that. I think also something JJ should be commended for is I think he was behind a lot of the casting in the show, which, I mean, say what you want about Lost, but you can't fault that casting.
Oh my God. Well, let's go through some of our characters, that we're introduced to in this pilot and throughout the show. Because I think you're right. The character. What's really interesting as well is that I feel like initially there is a kind of archetype to each of the characters, right? Like I think that's what's quite nice is that you do get a gauge of who is who straight away, because you've got like the good doctor, you've got the kind of maybe slightly racist redneck, you've got the kind of comedy sidekick in Charlie, and they kind of tick certain archetype boxes, and then what the show does really cleverly through its flashbacks is reveal they're not who they seem, kind
Absolutely.
of thing, right? But yeah, like an amazing cast of people. First of all, let me ask you about Jack, played by Matthew Fox.
Yeah.
Hey, you! Come here! I need you to get this woman away from these fumes. Take her over there. Stay with her. If her contractions occur any closer than 3 minutes apart, call out for me.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Okay? Hey! What's your name?
Jack!
Jack is the all-round good guy, right? He is the all-American hero character. He's like the character that they had to have at the center of this show when it began, right? Played by the very handsome Matthew Fox. He is a doctor. He's a surgeon. You see him from the pilot. He's running around helping people, saving lives. He has this kind of backstory where he has kind of issues with his father, right, which come into play quite a lot throughout the show. But he's essentially kind of placed in the show as the hero figure, right? And he does have a bit of a hero complex about him. And he goes on some interesting twists and turns throughout the show as it goes on. But what do you think of Jack generally and this kind of Matthew Fox performance?
I think because Jack's almost, he's quite I guess ultimately a disliked character because he's the do-gooder and he does have evolution as it goes on, but I think by then a lot of people are so sick of his character, they're like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm into the evolution. And I think because of that, I feel kind of indebted to like Jack. I actually think he has... I'm always rooting for an underdog, which is funny because Jack is kind of not
the
an
opposite.
Underdog. He's the opposite of an underdog.
He's the handsome white man at the centre of all this,
exactly.
Right?
He's like the hero of everything. But I love this. He's a very damaged hero, and I think as the show goes on, and we learn the extent of his backstory and his inability to give up, and always wanting to fix things, and sometimes he just has to let go, but he can't. It might seem a bit rote and a bit done run, but I think Matthew Fox, and this gets me a bit of stick whenever I say this, but I'm a staunch defender of Matthew Fox and his performance in the show. I think he is actually quite incredible. And I don't know if that word has really ever been used when discussing Matthew Fox before, but hey, we're doing it now. I think he really, really brings it in the scenes that he needs to bring it with. And he seems, and I don't know if a lot of the cast members, I think, there's a lot of stuff spoken about Matthew Fox behind the scenes. I don't think he really got on with a lot of people.
Yeah.
From what I've read and what I understand. But he seems like a great scene partner, and I think he really kind of picks up what a lot of the characters put down, a lot of the other actors put down. So a lot of my favourite moments in Lost involve Jack, like a lot of speeches with Locke. Locke and Jack are yin and yang, but their scenes, they come alive. And a big part of that is Matthew Fox. So I am very defensive of him. And when he's not in the show, there's like very few episodes where he's like gone for a few episodes as it goes on. I find that I miss him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'm with the majority on this in that I don't like Jack. I do think and we'll talk about this as we go, but obviously there is this structure in which from week to week you get a different character that, the season focuses on, and you get their flashbacks. And I remember back in the day, I would always find myself groaning when I'm like, oh, it's a fucking Jack episode. Not a fan. I found him really as a character, and I know the show is aware of this, but he's so sort of judgmental and holier than thou, and like he has a kind of main character complex about him, right?
Absolutely.
I think where he thinks he's the cleverest and most capable person. That in itself can be interesting at times, I think.
Yeah.
But it's like the Xander problem in Buffy, I think, sometimes, where I'm like, does the show know that actually this guy is a bit of a toxic douchebag, or does it think he's the hero, you know? And like I go back and forth with that, I think, with Jack. Do you know what I mean? I completely see what you mean. I think one of the most interesting moments for me, and a real I guess if you'd asked me during season 1 to 3 what I thought of Jack, maybe I would have been a bit down on him. But there's this really interesting scene in season 4 premiere where he puts a gun to Locke's head in front of everyone, and he pulls the trigger, but there's no bullets in the gun. And that for Jack to have like been willingly about to murder someone in front of everyone is such a huge moment for this character. And I think that's kind of the spark of his evolution, really, for me from then on. He does really interesting things that characters like that don't really do in TV. 100%. And actually, again, it goes with what we were saying earlier about season 4 and 5 and that latter period being really interesting. I think what happens to Jack from kind of man of science into man of faith is really interesting. Like, there's a really fun trajectory he has.
It's funny because Jack Shepherd, who I do the podcast with, not me imagining I'm sat with Matthew Fox in a room. That would be
so weird.
odd.
Weird that you're called Jack and Jacob.
I know.
And you have this Lost podcast, but anyway,
it's quite funny. I never forget when they mentioned Jacob. They're like, the man who knows everything about the iron. His name is Jacob. And I just looked at my auntie and uncle I was watching with, and I was like, what? This is incredible.
It's me.
But he actually liked the idea that Jack might evolve into man of faith, but he isn't sold on the execution of it. He's almost a bit like, I kind of knew it was going to happen, but now I'm seeing it. I'm a bit disappointed with how it's playing out, which is a bit of a spoiler with where our future episodes go. But yeah, he which is, I find, super interesting as well, because it's, I mean, you liked it. I was a fan of it. Yeah.
And I do think Matthew Fox is good. I think he gets better. I think he has a few ropey moments performance-wise in that pilot, actually, rewatching it. But I remember moments of... Is it the finale of season 1, Jacob, where Jack is having a conversation with Sawyer, and Sawyer mentions that he met his dad?
Yes.
And Jack kind of breaks down and starts crying. Like, I remember that moment so clearly, even though it's been years since I've seen that. But like, he has these moments, particularly when he gets emotional, where I think Matthew Fox is incredible, and it gets me emotional watching him get emotional.
Absolutely, that scene you say is amazing, and the score, everything is directed really well. And Matthew Fox, he kind of like tries to hide that he's crying almost, but and it's the first time those characters, the walls kind of break down because they're like rivals, and it's an incredible scene. And I agree with you, Matthew Fox, absolutely. It's just like, he really nails the scenes that it's important that he nails.
And also, let's just quickly mention Michael Giacchino's score for Lost as well. Like, another one of the most important parts of this show, right?
Absolutely.
I think, is the music, And
I think, again, a lot of people, it's just like... What a score. Like, one of the all-time TV scores, in my opinion. I would say that, but just taking off my critical hat, or my lost loving hat for a second, I truly think it's astonishing.
I do. And it will absolutely make me cry, that score. It can also be really scary at times as well.
Absolutely.
There's some truly chilling moments due to the score, I think, as well. Like,
Absolutely.
he has complete control over the sort of wild tonal shifts of this show, I think.
There's this really cool, I just love this little, I think it's episode... It's when, I think Boone is trying to save a woman who's drowning. Her name's Joanna. We don't know her. But she's going for a morning swim, and she drifts out to sea, and they all try and save her. And you've got this this really weird percussion going on, and apparently it was just like they just had fake wreckage of, or well, it wasn't fake, but like played wreckage that they were using on the set. And he was like, pull that in and just like start hitting it, hitting and you hear it in the background. It's just like sounds just really. I thought it's just really inventive and really cool. It's like resourceful, making use of the stuff he had around him.
I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
Quite a genius. Kate. Let's talk about Kate, an interesting character set up in the pilot and in season 1 as being the other star, right, alongside Matthew Fox, played by Evangeline Lilly. She is also a kind of love interest. Like, these two have a kind of spark from the beginning, right? Jack and Kate, they're a bit of a will they, won't they. Kate, who is also this incredibly smart, resourceful, capable character at the beginning, very physically tough. Turns out when we learn a bit about her backstory that actually she was a criminal on the run, and there's a whole big mystery, right, as to what did Kate do to end up on the run, and the show kind of really teases that out for quite a long time.
Put your gun back in your pants, Sawyer. Saeed's right. You keep walking, you're not going to make it to the beach.
Yeah, why is that?
Trust me.
What are your thoughts on Kate as a character?
Probably even more controversial than Jack is Kate. I think I would probably go on a limb and say probably the most disliked character in Last One Off.
Interesting.
Now, what you say about Jack's episodes, you're like, it's a Jack episode. I kind of had with Kate.
Yeah.
But do you know what? It's nothing really to do with Evangeline Lilly's performance. I think the writers struggled with Kate more than they did with any other character.
Yeah.
Because she had to be kind of bent at will to doing what other characters were doing or whatever. And it kind of made her character a bit inconsistent.
Yes.
But consistent in the fact that it was a bit annoying.
Agreed.
So, yeah. So it was a losing battle. And I know Evangeline Lilly has been quite vocal about not
she
liking...
spoke to you in interviews about stuff, hasn't she?
Yeah. She
Yeah.
kind of dropped a bit of a bombshell interview I had with her for the second Ant-Man film, in which she said she was made to do a nude scene. You don't see her nude, but it was required that, she was told it was required that she was nude to do the scene. I think it was in season 3 or 4. And she just felt so comfortable that she now doesn't do nude scenes at all. She's just... but she's also been very vocal about storyline beats regarding her character and about how she didn't really feel she had agency, which is fair enough. I mean,
I think that's fair. I think that her trajectory was worse in the way that it, in the opposite to Jack, in that she starts off as this quite cool, almost action heroine with a kind of shady past, right? Yeah. Who was, on the run and stuff. And she, in the latter seasons, she's kind of just like, she's a mum. And she sort of what defines her, it feels like, in the second half of the show, which is kind of sad.
She kind of, as well, like, she also kind of goes along with things.
Yeah.
You're not really sure why she's doing that. And then it's kind of explained she's doing it because Jack's doing it or Sawyer's doing it. And you're like, oh, right. Well, that's not the most convincing of reasons. I mean, I'm just being, I've got to be critical when it comes to Lost in some ways. And this is one that I've learned to be critical when it comes to, just the believability of character motivations and whatnot.
I think that's true. And as much as there are some great characters, great female characters in this show, and I know one of your favourite characters we'll talk about when we get to season 3, right? But it definitely does feel like there is more time and effort spent on the male characters in this show, particularly as it goes on, and the cast gets smaller in a way and more focused in on a handful of the men at the center of this, right? I think.
True. And I think, at the end of the day, like, Kate probably is I think the other women characters are written more effectively than Kate. But hey, she was one of the main characters. Like I say, I had to kind of make sure she was part of the A plot a lot of the time, and even when it didn't really make sense for her to be. So
what about one of the I would say probably one of the fan favourite characters, Sawyer, right? Josh Holloway, Hunky Sawyer. What do you think of him?
What an evolution this man has throughout the 6 seasons of the show.
When I was 19, I needed $6,000 to pay these guys off I was in trouble with. So I found a pretty lady with a dumb husband who had some money. I got him to give it to me. I was out for a tragedy. Came the man I was hunting. Came Sawyer.
For me, upon rewatch, and I've rewatched a lot of times, each time I realise Sawyer is probably arguably the joint best character. And I think... Again, it's Josh Holloway. I mean, the writing is fantastic, but he obviously brings something to that role that other actors would struggle to bring. But like you say, at the beginning, he's kind of racist. He's, not kind of, he is. And
you kind of think he's going to be a bit of a baddie in season 1, right? Like, he is the one that's kind of lying and conning people, hiding the guns. He is, quite outwardly racist, actually. And this is the other funny thing that really puts this show in a certain time period, right? 2004, the backdrop of the Iraq War was going on. We've got a character who we'll get to in a minute who is from Iraq, but that kind of xenophobia and racism is embedded in the kind of the story of these characters, isn't it?
Like the all-American guy being like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But like you say, an incredible evolution. There is something... He's an amazing performer, I think, Josh Holloway, and there is something so charismatic about him. Like, it seems like he has amazing chemistry with almost everyone he has scenes with. Reminds me a bit of Spike in Buffy. Like, he's one of these people that it feels like every time he gets a scene with someone else, there is this kind of spark, Yeah, he's brilliant.
That's a really good comparison. I think the thing as well about Sawyer is that because he is one of the main characters, sure, but in season 1, he's still on the outside a little bit. He's not really. And even, it's not until later on in the show that through sheer necessity of the plot, a lot of the other characters are in a different location, that Sawyer becomes a de facto leader. And it's only then that I kind of realised the extent of Sawyer's facets, his many facets. And And even Sawyer becomes aware of his many facets as well, really. And I think there's this, I don't know, he's just hysterical. And like you say, like you know, on a plane there's going to be people from all walks of life, and people are going to be changed by this experience. So it's really nice to see it happen in real time with characters like Sawyer, characters who at first you do despise or dislike or are wary of, who by the end you adore.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone in this, actually, it's worth saying as well, everyone in this show is so attractive, aren't they?
Very hunky.
Everyone is beautiful.
Yeah.
And they never get less beautiful as it goes on. That's always been a running joke about Lost, right? Is that these people have not showered for however many weeks or months, and they still look gorgeous. But anyway, Naveen Andrews as Saeed as well.
Oh, mate. That
incredible,
hair.
Right?
Good
incredible. He's such a good character, I think, as well. You know, like he's amazing.
He's amazing. Yeah.
We do not have bamboo in Iraq, although we do have something similar, reeds. But their effect is the same when the shoots are inserted underneath the fingernails.
You know what I think, Ali? I think you've never actually tortured anybody in your life.
Unfortunately for us both, you're wrong.
What a good character. This kind of interesting guy that wants to be good, right? And he is fundamentally a good guy, but he's got this difficult past. He's from Iraq. He was a torturer and an interrogator in the war, right? Which comes to be quite important to his character throughout this. And he is constantly it feels like he is constantly in this kind of moral battle with himself. Am I a good man or am I a villain, right? And I think he's just one of the best characters to watch in this show.
The torturer, and then also, so I think a lot of his scenes are probably the most challenging that Lost has through virtue of the material. And I think it works that he's not one of the mains. Like, he is a main character, but he's on it so much that when he is in it, firstly, you're willing to chew with the heavier side of the material, but also you are just really happy to see him. I think, like you say, when Jack shows up and you're like, oh, well, you realise it's a Saeed episode, I think everyone was like really, really ready to get stuck into it.
I completely agree. And he's so capable. I think that's the other thing. He's a great character to have in the mix because he's really good at everything he does, right? He's really tough. He's good at detecting the liars. He's really techie as well. Like he's just a very good character to have in the mix, I think, isn't he?
Absolutely. And very helpful for script writers.
Yeah.
Like you say, he's like a human lie detector test. I love the scenes where he's just people, a mysterious person manifests and then they're all talking and everyone else is lapping up what they're saying, but Saeed's not giving anything away, but you're like, he's detected about 5 lies of what that person said, and he's going to tell them all later what they are, and it's just it's something really exciting knowing that that's going on in his head and we can't see it. And
I love it.
He's a great character.
Jin and Sun, they're always considered as a bit of a pair, right? Which may be unfairly because they're actually apart for most of the show, aren't they? But
agonisingly,
they're so great, aren't they? So obviously Jim played by Daniel Day Kim and Sun played by Yoon Jin Kim. This married couple, they arrive washed up on the beach as a married couple. They're having marriage problems. Jin seems like initially not a great guy, a little bit conservative, a little bit controlling, and then of course they have this tremendous evolution, don't they? They're a real heart of the show, and I think they are fan favourites, right?
They are undoubtedly so. I adore them. I think they're brilliant. Like we're talking about with Sun as well, but I think it's quite more obvious with Jin because Jin starts out one thing, and so much so that Daniel Day Kim was like, I am really worried that this show is going to get cancelled and I'm just going to have been written as an Asian stereotype, basically.
Yes.
And they were like, we promise you that, put faith in us and that won't be the case. And by God, was he right to put the faith in them. Sun as well, Yoon Jin Kim, just brilliant. And I think they were underrated characters. And through the sheer fact that they were underrated, they've now become rated.
Yes.
They are loved.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And they didn't, they didn't always have a lot to do with whatever was the main big mystery or action set piece happening on the island, right? But they had this kind of heart. They were almost like the kind of heart of the story, I think.
Absolutely.
Right? This kind of beautiful married couple. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like Jin didn't want Sun to be a part of that, and but then she wanted to kind of be more involved, which helped kind of spearhead their evolution into what their marriage becomes. They're seeing same episodes, well, the same finale before the raft launches in season 1, where they haven't been speaking for multiple episodes because Jin feels betrayed that Sun could speak English this whole time, and they just have a goodbye, and it is, oh man, like I'm getting emotional thinking about it.
Yeah,
just perfect acting. It's brilliant. It's fantastic.
And then the show creators tear them apart for what feels like half of the runtime of the show, right? It is so sad. Like this kind of couple that we want to read. They're literally separated by time and space and all sorts throughout the bulk of the show, aren't they? And it's like, oh, it's hard.
I think that's probably why a lot of season 6 is quite agonising at times, because the amount of near misses they have.
Yeah.
They show up and then Jin's just gone off somewhere else, and she's like, Jin, and they're like, no, you just missed him. And it's like, no, for God's sake.
Yeah, that is the showrunners were taking the piss, I think, by that point, weren't they?
Yeah.
And just quickly as well, Charlie as well, who like again feels like quite an important role in season 1, right? And then that kind of peters out a bit by the second season.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think he gets quite frustrating and annoying, and you know, it's no slight on Dominic Monaghan, who I think is great. And I modelled my image on 13-year-old me bought Vans because Charlie wore them in Lost, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he was great. He was basically in the Lost version of Oasis, wasn't he? Like, you know, a brother called Liam, like, absolutely. You know, all this kind of stuff.
From Manchester. Yeah, no, they really, his flashbacks are very funny and stuff, because they were like, had to like kind of convey this rock and roll lifestyle. And it was just funny to see like the writer's interpretation of that. But no, I liked Charlie until I didn't really, which doesn't make his moments in season 3, his heroic moments, any less effective. They are a classic by Lost standards, but I think he gets quite whiny, doesn't he, in season 2? Yeah.
His story of just being the addict, I feel like once they sort of resolve that, they don't quite know what to do with him. Like, it feels like, you know, he's just they turn him into a bit of a dick, don't they? At some points, he gets very possessive over Claire and the baby and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
Jealous of Locke's like friendship with Claire, and then he's also just quite rude to Hurley, who's his like best friend on the island. Yes. Like a few times, he never really gives him the benefit of the doubt when there's like little moments that where he should, basically. And if I did that with my best friend, I'd want him to call me out on it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Charlie, be better, man.
Speaking of Hurley, let's talk about Hurley, shall we? So played by Jorge Garcia, this character at the beginning feels very much like the comic relief, right? He's the heart of the show. He's funny, he's human, he's caring, he has these little one-liners. And then the more we learn about him, the more he actually has this really fascinating backstory. Hurley, not just this kind of schlubby, funny guy, he also turns out to be a multi-millionaire. He won the lottery before landing on the island with these numbers that he used on his lottery ticket. The numbers end up being very important, right? Because he believes the numbers are in fact cursed. The numbers gave him nothing but bad luck, and then these numbers pop up quite a lot throughout all 6 seasons of the show, leading the audience to believe that maybe Hurley is actually very, very important to what is going on in the mythology of the island, right? But Hurley is such a fan favourite character as well.
Absolutely. You know, I'm more mixed on Hurley than most, but it's not because I dislike Hurley. It's just because sometimes, I think early on, before he became central to the plot, he was kind of thrown in for comedy value. So, but because of that, he would usually come after like a big reveal or a big moment where the action would then take a few episodes before dealing with that.
Right.
And they'd kind of just be like, oh, here's Hurley. But then when, I guess, you know, the numbers side of things, which is obviously a massive part of Lost, but not really instrumental to like moving things forward very quickly. It was just kind of this overarching mythology thing. It weaves him into this into the show in a really intrinsic way that is really interesting, but doesn't really require him to do much heavy lifting. So it's really, they wrote him very cleverly, actually. Hurley, they really did play into his Jorge Garcia could play into his strengths as a comedic actor, whilst also being important to, the mythology of the show.
I agree. I think he's brilliant at the beginning as this kind of audience surrogate, I suppose, right? Like, he's the one going, what the hell? Like you said, he's the one that mentions, is that a dinosaur? Like, he's the one that's reacting to things in the way that we as audience members reacted to them a lot of the time, right? And he was funny, and he had this kind of comic relief moments. And I love that. Because am I right in thinking he's one of the very last characters in season 1 to actually get like a flashback episode? Like, I feel like it's quite a while, right, before we find out what Hurley's backstory is. And then suddenly this mad mystery involving the numbers that becomes so important to the show, right? And you're like, oh, wow, maybe Hurley is more than just this kind of comedy sidekick character at this point. And it's quite fun the way they balance that, I think.
I think that's absolutely right. Like, everyone's like, when we've had 2 Sawyers, we've had 2 Case, we've had a few whatever, and then it's like, when's Hurley? And I think it's episode 18, and like, boom, here's Hurley. And it doesn't disappoint. It's really good. I don't know if I love the episode so much, but I love the aspect of the numbers so much. So he became more than just that. You're right. Yeah, it was interesting. It was a great way of conveying the overall importance of what his character would become.
There are so many characters to go through. Very, very briefly, Boone and Shannon. They're kind of, I would say, quite useless characters.
like definitely. Obviously, they were the first. They were going to be the first to die. You just knew it. But they brought something to the show. I don't dislike their scenes by any stretch.
They almost feel like they kind of brought in a teen audience or something, these like pretty teens.
It was like, here's their flashbacks were like the OC.
Yes, exactly.
Within
that.
Lost.
Exactly that, and I do love that, by the way, just FYI as well, like this idea that each episode's flashbacks kind of almost felt like it dipped into a different genre, right? You had the kind of like gritty war stuff with Saeed, or you had the kind of con thriller with Sawyer, or, cops and criminals on the run with Kate and all that kind of stuff. Like, and you're right, Boone and Shannon, it was like we were in some sort of naff teen drama. Absolutely. You got to them,
and like, it gave Giacchino a lot to work with in terms of his score as well, like the motifs of each character, which lasts right through, were also a big part of signaling what you're about to watch.
Michael and Walt as well, like, it's always tricky, right, when you cast a child in a show like this, because things are going to change and, things go on. What do you think of Michael and Walt?
It's funny because Walt is like, he's just like, I don't know if he's a good character per se, but it's good to have like a kid who can get stuff from other characters that adults can't get, in this case Locke or whatever. So it's really hard to judge him on the merits of his character. Do you know what I mean? But like, I don't dislike him when he's on screen. Michael, I actually really like Michael, and I don't know if it's because I feel Michael is hard done by when it comes to the material, which Harold Perrineau has spoken about recently as well. But I think he's not very likable, but it's not his fault that he's not likable. He's like the angry dad. And his kid's a bit errant, and he's struggling, and he's just been frustrated with his kids. So you've got to understand his plight, but it doesn't really make him the most engaging of characters.
Agreed. I think it's a shame. I think he was a bit hard done by the writing, because Harold Perrineau is so good, I think, as well. And he is a little bit defined by just being a dad, basically, I think, as well, isn't he? Like you say, he's the angry dad, the angry, worried dad. And that is kind of his arc all the way until his arc ends, really, isn't it? It's like, that's it.
Yeah, and it's so linked in with, like, Walt. Like, it would have been nice to have seen him. I know there was hints of him and Son. There was, like, some deleted scenes and stuff of having, like, a bit of a chemistry. But, like, I think it being so linked in with Walt was never going to mean his character had legs, especially because Walt's legs were growing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Sad times. And Walt was a cool... I remember the amount of theories that people had about Walt too, right? Did he have powers? Was he the one that created the island in his head, right? Like, has he got some sort of control over everything happening here? You know, there were theories about Walt, weren't there, at the time?
So many. And they were kind of like perpetuated by the writers saying things like in podcasts and whatnot, and there was these little mobisodes that were released, I think, between season 4 and 5, 3 and 4, I can't remember. And one of them actually kind of explored Walt and his ability to kind of make things appear, because the theory is that he, you know, after you see Walt flipping through a comic book that had a picture of a polar bear in it, polar bear appears on the island.
Yeah, exactly.
But just to caveat for people who were like, oh, so it was there magically. No. Okay, there is a reason.
There are reasons. And finally, last but not least, Terry O'Quinn as John Locke. Like, I think, for my money, one of the great TV characters ever. I think he is one of the most fascinating characters ever created, and Terry O'Quinn is just so good.
Oh, right? Man, absolutely imagine amazing. Anyone else playing that role. You just can't. Oh, can you?
Oh, phenomenal.
Hey, don't you walk away from me. You don't know who you're dealing with. Don't ever tell me what I can't do, ever. This is destiny. This is destiny. This is my destiny. I'm supposed to do this, damn it! Don't tell me what I can't do. Don't tell me what I can't.
Yeah, the words can't really sum up how great Locke is a character. And, you know, that isn't to say I like Locke the whole way through. Locke can be infuriating,
he's awful,
right? Yeah.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Just in season 3 when he's just basically blowing up every way for them to leave the island. And it's just like such an arrogant character motivation. But you're like, oh, Locke, but you're so well acted.
Oh, and you know, I get him. Like, there is something so tragic. He's one of the great tragic characters, right? Isn't he? There's so much sadness about this man who has had this incredibly sad life. Like, absolutely horrendous things happening to him over and over and over again, right? And then him finally feeling like he's found his place on this island. That incredible flashback episode he gets right at the beginning of season 1. Is it episode 3 or 4 of the show?
Oh,
right?
It's 4, yeah.
And I think that's a real turning point of the show, isn't it, really? Where it's revealed very cleverly at the end of his flashback episode that he was paralyzed. He was in a wheelchair, right?
Yeah.
And that for some reason landing on this island has healed him. And like that is a turning point where you're like, oh, this show is supernatural. There is something going on with Locke, like, and you can see where he's coming from now in the way that he's behaving since he's landed on this island as well.
Yeah.
You know? So
such
good.
A well deployed episode. I'm glad you mentioned it. It's so yeah, the first 3 you're like, oh yeah, this is fun, and then 4 you're like, wow, this is actually more than just fun. This show could be quite special.
Yeah, and he is that kind of... And Locke episodes were always brilliant because Locke was always the one that wanted to find out about the island, right? He wanted to explore, he wanted to uncover the mysteries, he wanted to know what the monster was and what was going on. Like, and so you always just felt like, yes, come on, Locke's here, something important is going to happen.
Absolutely. They were mystical, weren't they, those episodes? Yeah,
so good. And his war with Jack, you've mentioned this already, but this rivalry they have all the way from the beginning, right? This man of science, Jack is very logical, he's a doctor. Locke is this believer, right? That the island is magical, that the island brought them here, and they butt heads continuously, right? There are some just incredible Locke versus Jack moments throughout this entire show.
It's not real. Look, you want to push the button, you do it yourself.
If it's not real, then what are you doing here, Jack? Why did you come back? Why do you find it so hard to believe?
Why do you find it so easy?
It's never been easy.
When Jack and Locke square off, you know it's going to be an all-timer. For all kinds of reasons, like well written, well acted, and they never disappoint.
So good.
And I think the show kind of knows that they've got, you know, 2 aces up their sleeve with these two guys especially when they're in scenes together. Because they, aside from that, they don't really have a lot of scenes together. They're kind of kept apart as it goes on, and then when they face off, you're like, oh wow. But some of those scenes are some of my favourite scenes in all of Lost, for sure.
Incredible. And Locke is such a flawed character, and he does almost become a villain in season 3 at that moment, right? When he's doing such frustrating things. And then, of course, he literally becomes a villain at the end, which we'll get to, but it's really fascinating, all that stuff, isn't it?
It's an interesting way to have kept Terry O'Quinn in the show, for sure.
Really interesting, yeah. So season 1, how do you find it now, looking back and revisiting season 1? It's this almost kind of like beach survivor type show, isn't it? That kind of also has these weird mysteries.
I love how low the stakes are in many of the episodes. Like, should we go to the caves or stay on the beach?
Right.
And like, it has to be like that, right? Because that's how you can do the characterization and whatnot.
It's great. It's such a brilliant way, isn't it, of exploring the characters. It's like,
totally.
This week we're going to try and find food, and Locke's really good at hunting boar, or we've got this and we've got that. And it is this literally just this stranded on a desert island show, really, in season 1, isn't it? It feels like,
it totally is. If that sounds boring to people who haven't watched it and they're like, 24 episodes, I'd much rather buy Netflix 8. It's actually it's so gripping and I don't think there really is a bad episode. I think there are episodes where you're like, oh, come on, let's get to the good stuff. But even those episodes are enjoyable, I would say.
And of course, throughout season 1, the thing that everyone was talking about is, what is the monster, right? There is this monster, like I said at the beginning, I thought it was a dinosaur, some giant thing that sounds really weird. It kind of sounds mechanical, and it's eating people. It turns out to be this kind of weird, mystical black smoke thing, which we find out at some point. But yeah, what do you make of the monster? Do you remember what you initially thought it was?
I had no idea what to expect, really, I guess, because I didn't really have many other shows that I'd watched, and I was like, what could this be? I certainly didn't think what it ended up being. I think
Sorry, I was going to say, do we see what it is in season 1? Like, do we find out it's black smoke in season 1?
Yeah, in the finale, you kind of see Locke being dragged by a pillar of black smoke, is how it's referred to. And they kind of throw dynamite down the hole. It's trying to put him down. And you see this really weird, this bit dodgy effects-wise, but you see how like the smoke disintegrating. Kate's like, what the hell? Kate and everyone watching is like, what the hell?
It's interesting, isn't it? This black smoke that is like, sounds mechanical. It's got like that amazing sound effect, that like, right? Yeah. And it seems to have reasoning as to who it's killing and who it's not, right, as well. And all of that was really fascinating at the beginning. It's like, why is it coming face to face with Locke and letting him live? And then it's like mercilessly killing other people left, right, and center. And it was such a fascinating mystery, that, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, it's like this security system that is judge, jury, executioner. If it chooses to be, that kind of gives characters an opportunity to repent or whatever, or like face them. And that was my read of it as it went on. Obviously, in the final seasons, we learn exactly what it is. But I always loved Smokey. Like, whenever there was a Smokey appearance, I would kind of whoop and holler in my sofa.
So exciting. It was always so exciting when we got to see the monster. And you're right. Do you think that was what lent to the opinion in that first couple of seasons that the island was purgatory? Because that was the most popular opinion, right? That they all crashed and died on that plane crash. The island was some kind of in-between world. And that maybe, like you said, this judge, jury, and executioner monster thing was taking away the souls of the people that were bad or whatever, or didn't repent, or
it definitely did help to kind of shut that theory down. That's for sure. I think it was really interesting about the smoke monster, as you say, is how it would just kind of instantly kill some characters, but then kind of give other characters a chance to do whatever, which I guess is answers as it goes on. But yeah, it definitely added to this feel. I mean, I think there was this, at one point you see kind of like 3 shoots go into one, and it had this I think it was people theorize it was Cerberus who like guards the gates of hell or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was I think they played into it as well, to be honest.
I love it.
Yeah.
And actually another thing we should say, in terms of sort of TV history, this was one of those big first shows that people talked about online, right? This was the kind of early internet days,
Right.
Even more so than the X-Files, this became like the message boards, the forums, the theorizing. There was this kind of online presence for Lost, wasn't there, that began in season 1.
There really was. There was people I still follow now on Twitter who were like kind of the spearheads of Lost message boards, of websites that theorized about plot points. And there were even by season 3 onwards, especially season 4, there was like tie-in things set up before seasons that gave you clues about what was to come, that if you watched it, it didn't hurt your enjoyment if you didn't play it. But those who had played it, there'd be like little details about what you'd played online. Like I think there was a whole thing about the freighter in season 4 before season 4 began. So you kind of learnt little details about what to expect. That it used the internet in a great way for its marketing. And I think shows do it now, but I think they can't really be bothered to do it as intricately now.
All the seasons have great little finales, right? I think, and season 1 ends with incredible cliffhangers, incredible finales. There's been this threat throughout season 1 of these other people, right? The others, these other people that maybe have been on this island longer than our survivors, that may be hostile. We get somebody. There's a whole story in season 1 with somebody that was pretending to be a passenger but wasn't on the manifest, right? And he was planted.
Oh wow,
so good. And then we get that terrifying moment at the end of season 1 where Walt is kidnapped by these scary men with beards, right? And you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like the threat of the others that is kind of fed into season 1 is so good, right? And really scary, I think, the way it's dealt with.
So scary, and like you say, peaks in the most horrifying way possible when in the middle of the ocean, you think you're being saved, and there's that moment, oh wow, these are actually these others.
Where are we? Hey, it's a good thing we found you. Yeah, we survived, and there's a whole group of people on the other. Ain't that something? Yeah.
Only the thing is, we're gonna have to take the boy.
What? What'd you say?
The boy. We're gonna have to take him.
Hey!
But what a great way to then go kind of, because season 2 is very much, I think, the season of the Hatch, and also kind of like introducing the others as more of a human threat.
Right.
And what a great way to set that up.
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And they deliberately make them look like they are... what's the word? More kind of primal or something, in the clothes they wear and the way they look and everything. And of course, that turns out not quite to be the case. But all of that is really fascinating, really scary.
Yeah.
And of course, you mentioned the hatch there. There's this ongoing arc throughout season 1. Locke finds a metal hatch, a door, right, that goes down underground. And this was such a thing, wasn't it? What is down there? What's in the hatch? Is there a person living down there? Is that where the monster lives? He spends about half of season 1, right, trying to get into this hatch and try and open it and get inside. It's such a massive thing.
It's again like, I think, that the build-up Lost was able to do with a storyline like that made the payoff even greater. Like season 2, episode 1 would not have been half as amazing as it was if we didn't have that half a season of build-up of being introduced to the hatch. And I think that's why I'm really happy Lost did have many episodes in its early seasons. Because it became, like you say, like a cultural phenomenon. The hatch alone, even people who don't watch Lost know there was a goddamn hatch.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true, yeah. That incredible cliffhanger at the end of season 1 where it's just Jack and Locke looking down the hatch, right? And then we cut to black.
Should have been kind of illegal. Like, you can't be. I mean, I remember us in the UK, we got that finale quite soon before season 2 began. So, because it came a year later in the UK. Sorry, if I had watched Lost and had to wait a year, I don't really know what I would have done.
No. unbearable. Really great finale, incredible cliffhanger, and by the time season 2 starts, am I right in thinking, Jacob, it feels like, in my memory, season 2 was when the world was obsessed with Lost. Like, it felt like that combination of that cliffhanger ending and then the way season 2 opens. Yeah. Lost was like the biggest thing in the world, I think, by this point.
Yeah, I think season 2, episode 1 was the most watched episode of Lost, and in one of the most watched episodes of US drama, ever. It's like 30 million or something. But like, I think for me, like that was Lost hysteria at its highest, and even as a viewer, kind of, I think I watched it a bit after because of the UK. Just as a viewer, the excitement levels. Not saying they never reached the heights of that moment, but when something is so new and so fresh, and you realise you're watching something really special, that's a really unique moment that we only get. I mean, I'm sure you'll agree when we've only got that a very few amount of times since Lost has ended.
Lost has these moments that still give me chills to this day, and the opening scene of season 2 where you see this guy in this room wake up, exercise, he throws on some mamas and papas or some mama casts, right?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
You assume it's some sort of flashback, or we're somewhere in the real world off the island. And then that incredible moment when there's an explosion and the camera looks up and we see Locke and Jack looking down, and that's what was in the hatch the whole time. This man living in there. It's an amazing opening, isn't it? It's one of my favorites.
It's this amazing opening because, it, like you say, like we've not seen any other characters or anything, and you see this unfamiliar scene and unfamiliar character that suddenly you're thrust with. You're bam. You've got the familiarity of Jack and Locke looking down that hatch. And it's just like the heads. I mean, it's a really well executed moment because you're just like, wait, what? What even did I just see? What? And I mean, even now, you can't really put it into words.
No, it's
how good it is. But every now and then, I throw it on, just like the opening scene, like on YouTube or whatever, at work, just to.
It's so good.
Remember how amazing it is, and it never ever fails to put the hairs on end of the back of my neck.
So let's talk about season 2. Season 2 predominantly takes place inside the hatch, right? So we discover what is down inside this hatch. There's a man in there called Desmond who has been in there for years, running this weird little sort of science station where he has to control a computer, input a series of numbers that happen to be Hurley's numbers, right, into a computer every 108 minutes in order to stop the world ending, essentially. He doesn't know what will actually happen, if the world really will end, or if there'll be some cataclysmic incident if he lets that timer run out. But he hasn't risked it, and he's been down there for years and years and years. When our characters discover him down there, Desmond escapes, and our main characters take over this hatch. They start pressing the button every 108 minutes. While they're down there, they are uncovering the backstory of this little science station. It belonged to kind of a collective called the Dharma Initiative back in the 70s, and actually we soon discover throughout season 2 there are loads of other little Dharma stations all around the island where these different scientific experiments were being conducted. So the mystery is, what were the Dharma Initiative really doing? What are these stations actually for? Is it true that this button is going to stop a big explosion from happening, or is it all a lie? So all of these mysteries are going on throughout season 2. Meanwhile, we meet some new characters. We meet survivors from the tail section of the plane. Season 2 just kind of expands the world a little bit. We meet some of the others, the mysterious others, in season 2. So it continues on in its usual format with flashbacks for characters, but we see a little bit more of the island, and we find out a bit more of the kind of mythology and backstory in season 2, don't we? Jacob, what do you think of season 2 and how it compares to the first season?
I am a real fan of the hatch element of Lost. I always found it so, like, I think Lost in its most cult really is like the hatch. The hatch is such an odd setting, and the whole idea of having to push the numbers every 108 minutes and like how characters that was like a real, obviously, discussion point at the beginning of the season, like, should we do this? Then it just becomes kind of like, they just do it, like, while they're chatting in scenes. And you're like, what, when you really break it down, this is such a weird thing you're doing. What the hell? So I really enjoy season 2, mainly because of the hatch element.
Agreed. This amazing new element that it introduces, that first of all, that amazing kind of almost like a psychological experiment, right? If you put in these numbers, it will save the world. The world will end if you don't input these numbers every 108 minutes, right? And of course, in that lost way, we don't know if this is true or not until the end. And it opens up this whole idea of there were these scientists doing experiments in maybe the 1970s, right? And this whole thing called the Dharma Initiative. And we would watch these introductory tapes by this man with one arm who is like telling people what's going on. And throughout the season 2, we discover there are other hatches. There are other like Dharma stations around the island, right? So it's kind of expanding the island's backstory as being this place where experiments took place and everything. It becomes a bit more sci-fi almost, doesn't it, at this point?
Totally. Yeah,
So
no, it
good.
really does. Like, yeah, when you see that blast door map, there's like a lockdown, and this like map flashes up briefly, and like, I mean, talk
Oh my
about
God.
leaning into your internet fan base.
I
That was
know. Freeze
poured over.
frames.
Yeah, they knew what they were
yeah.
doing, and as you say, it kind of it the scope was just in that moment like blown wide open. And yeah, the Dharma Initiative side of it, not to mention like merchandising, like the amount of stuff I bought with Dharma logos, like it was sad. I mean, I don't know how I had any friends at school. Looking back,
We honestly, me and my friends agonized over watching those tapes as well. We were John Locke when Locke was like, we're going to need to watch that again. You know, like that's the thing. It really lent into the fandom and the speculation, didn't it, in season 2? Like there was this almost dialogue with the fans. It felt
Locke was so obsessed with the hatch as well, like we were. Like it's just like so into the idea of the hat, because it was like, because he just loved like the idea of like a quest or the idea of a purpose or the idea of, and this hatch kind of gave him that until it didn't. But yeah,
and of course Jack very much not a believer that the hatch is going to do anything, right? Which again causes a lot of issues in season 2.
Right, listen carefully. If by some miracle you manage to get that computer working again, you got your end of the code. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. Hit execute. Again, 4, 8, 15...
Shut up!
Sorry?
Nothing is going to happen. Some man takes you down there, shows you a movie, and you push a button on faith alone. Nothing is going to happen!
In about 15 minutes, you're either going to be very right or very wrong, brother.
And Desmond, as a character who is introduced as the man in the hatch, who we sort of see at the beginning and end of this season, right? Again, like I seem to remember that initially he wasn't meant to be a kind of main character, but people loved him so much, right? But this character played by Henry Ian Cusick, what do you make of Desmond?
Adore him so much.
What a guy!
And I think again, like that, it's what Henry Ian Cusick brought to the role. But like the last thing, like if you'd asked like a lot of people, like, who's down the hatch, the last thing he'd say is like a very charismatic, brilliant head Scottish man. But that's what was down there, and I think that unexpectedness kind of really helped with Desmond's character. That when he runs off after like 3 episodes, you're like, wait, no, like we're desperate to see you again for a multitude of reasons. Like you've got answers, we think, and you're a really good presence in this show. So I wasn't surprised when we got to see him again, and he became one of the mains.
My absolute favourite character in Lost, possibly ever, is introduced in season 2, 2/3 of the way in. A man who at first appears to be called Henry Gale, is it right?
Henry Gale, yeah,
Then
Wizard of Oz reference.
Oh, and then of course turns out to be Benjamin Linus, played by Michael Emerson. Is he not one of the greatest characters ever created, Jacob?
My God alive, that man. Just one of the slipperiest, untrustworthy, manipulative characters in all of television. He is a joy to watch.
He's just the best, isn't he? So Benjamin Linus, he begins his arc partway through season 2, right? This mysterious man who is caught in a net in the jungle, and he claims his name is Henry Gale, and he claims that he was from Minnesota and he crash landed on this island, and he seems perfectly innocent. But one of the residents of the island, Danielle Rousseau, is convinced that he is one of the others, and she does not trust him. And the whole arc of his character in season 2 is he telling the truth or is he lying? And if he's lying, who is he really and what is he hiding? And this character is just, he is filled with lies and deceit and mystery, right?
Don't believe a word she says. He's one of them.
I have no idea what she's talking about. She's crazy.
How long has he been up there?
Since last night. Please just cut me down. My name is Henry Gale. I'm from Minnesota. Please.
He's lying.
And of course he is lying. He's Benjamin Linus, leader of the others. And why is he here? Season 2, he spends so much of his time manipulating our main characters, telling them lie after lie after lie. And then every time you think he might finally be about to tell them something that's true, it will turn out to be a lie or manipulation, right? And he gets inside the characters' heads, almost in a kind of Hannibal Lecter way.
This place is a joke. John?
What are you talking about?
I crawled through your vents, and I stood at your computer as the alarm beeped. And you know what happened? Nothing happened, John. Nothing happened at all. I never entered the numbers. I never pressed the button.
You're lying.
No, I'm done lying.
In some ways, this is when Lost becomes Lost for me, you know, when he comes into it. Like, there is this, again, it feels like there is this dialogue almost with the fandom itself in the character of Ben, where he almost embodies Lost for me, like this very frustrating, yet charismatic mystery box of a guy who you never quite know what his intentions are. You never know whether to trust him or not. All you know is that you love him and that he's really, really, like, you're kind of addicted to finding out more about him, right? And like, I just feel like the creators, as soon as he comes into it and as soon as Michael Emerson joined the cast, I feel like Damon and Carlton became obsessed with Ben Linus too. Like, there is so much emphasis on him as a character, isn't there, from this point onwards?
He must have been a scriptwriter's dream. Like, nothing's really off the table with him.
Yeah.
And like, if he says something, you could just reveal it to be a load of bullshit, like episodes later, and everyone be like, oh, of course, like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But those early scenes with when he's Henry Gale, when you're not sure whether he is who he says he is or not, are some of my favourite scenes in all of Lost. And I'm sure that's probably a big part of why he's your favourite character as well. And they knew it. They knew they were onto a winner with him. It's funny, really, because the success of many things obviously lies in the introduction or the decisions made on the fly. And the casting of Michael Emerson in this role and the response he received, like, if it hadn't have worked out that way and Ben ended up not becoming like a big part of the fabric of the show, it does make you wonder where Lost would have gone. Or
100%. Yeah.
So
because he became so integral to everything that happens from this point onwards.
Like,
yeah,
so integral, and it's unfathomable, isn't it? And I guess that's he made himself. He made that prospect unfathomable, and that's why they kept him around. So it doesn't really bear thinking about. Yeah.
But again, very similar to what happened to Spike on Buffy, this character that was supposed to be this one-season villain.
Really?
He was supposed to die, but fans loved him so much, it was like the writers kept finding ways to bring him back and make him a part of the main cast, right? And I feel like that happened with Ben Linus a bit too.
Yeah, I didn't know that with James Masters. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting, yeah.
Mate, they had a shot and they grabbed it. That's good for them. They
absolutely
smashed it.
And I love them for it. I love this character. He's absolutely brilliant. And so you've got Desmond and Ben, I think two of the absolute most favourite fan characters introduced in season 2. And then on the flip side, you've got some less successful new characters, right? You've got the tailies, the passengers in the tail section of the plane. We never knew what happened to them, right? It turns out they're all still alive and living their own little lost arc on another part of the island. And we're introduced to Ana Lucia, Libby, Mr. Echo. Why weren't these characters as successful, Jacob, as some of the others, do you think?
Well, I think because of the nature of their backstory on the island, as we learn in one pretty great episode, I think, is that they've had it much harder than the characters we got to know. So, like, if we'd been following them the whole time, it would have been just a horror show, basically.
Yeah.
So, because of that, when we meet them, their guard is up. They're not as likable instantly. Anyway, they're not as likable, and I think that's in it might have done their characters a bit of a disservice. They were never going to weave their way into the hearts of audiences being like that. To be honest, I think I think Ana Lucia kind of has a moment of turnaround where you're like, she's actually going to be nicer now. People are going to love her, but then she dies. And Libby as well. I mean, yeah,
it's brutal when they die. And actually, this is another thing we didn't really talk about yet, but it has that kind of Game of Thrones ruthlessness, this show.
Absolutely.
Where they will just kill off main characters left, right, and centre throughout.
Which I think has become even through. I mean, Game of Thrones did it in the final season because it was ending, but Game of Thrones wouldn't have done it if it was carrying on from that. Like, Game of Thrones became famous for that and then kind of stopped doing it, as did The Walking Dead. And I think shows now, they're just scared to get rid of any character because of a fear of a backlash, or because I don't know, just a lack of willingness to do it. Lost did it, and agonizingly so. I mean, so I think the tail section survivors, I think they had a harder job, let's say, of being as well liked. And Mr. Echo, I mean, I don't know what you think about him as a character.
Well, he could have been a fan favorite character, I think.
Right, he was on the path to becoming it.
Yeah,
and then Adewale Akinwuyi decided he just didn't want to be part of the show anymore, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
So and we always have Rosa Bernard. I
forgot about Rosa Bernard. They're they're great, aren't they?
Just
really
the
great.
Most heartwarming. Everyone needs a Rosa Bernard in their life.
And Libby was frustrating because we never really found out Libby's backstory, but she maybe had a connection with Hurley, and I was always like, oh my god, the fact that they killed her off before we found out more about her was so frustrating.
It was a bold swing of a move of Libby, and it kind of made her a bit of a like mythologically important, but people aren't really sure still why. Which is amazing for Cynthia Watros, the actress, to just be like, I made a mark in Lost, but not really through anything I did in Lost.
She's one of the handful of unsolved mysteries of Lost was Libby, right? It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the finale as well, because I love each season finale really shakes up the format and kind of reveals something new about this world, right? Season 2 finale reveals the backstory of Desmond and how he ended up in the hatch all those years ago. And we also see that there was one moment when he didn't press the numbers in time and it set off some kind of electromagnetic reaction. And that, it turns out, is the thing that happened at the exact time the plane crashes. So did Desmond actually cause the plane to crash? Incredible.
Amazing.
Loved that reveal. And meanwhile, in the present day, we see what happens when they let the timer run out and the hatch kind of implodes. There is this big electromagnetic incident. The sky goes kind of white and purple. It's a mad finale. What do you think of this finale, Jacob?
I remember this was like height of obsession, obviously, and I remember I watched that finale. I had a portable DVD player, and my uncle burned it onto a disc, and I went on this school trip to France, and I hosted these screenings of the finale with people who wanted to watch it, and what was I thinking? So weird. But the whole sequence that you just mentioned is by far the best part of the episode. I actually think it's my weakest finale overall.
Yeah. Agreed.
But that's not to say it's by any stretch a bad finale. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And we also see Michael and Walt leave the island. That's quite a big deal too, because I remember for me, I suppose we don't actually see where they get to, but in my head, I was kind of like, well, if this is actually a physical geographical place that you can leave, this isn't purgatory then. This is and I think season 2 did emphasize a little bit more that maybe this is an actual physical place.
Well,
there are scientists here, there is electromagnetism here, you can get a boat off the island. It feels a little bit more like it's not just this conceptual, mystical place.
Totally. Backed up by the final moment where it's the first scenes, present day scene set off the island.
Yes.
Where you find out that Penny has been looking for it, and you I think we found it, and that's huge. I mean, maybe a bit of an underwhelming final moment, but in terms of what you've said, so true.
Yeah.
It completely shoots that theory to sunshine. I guess as well, Michael and Walt, a lot of people were like, oh, they're clearly not left, they'll be back, and it's No, they have to get Walt out of the show now because
he's gone.
He's gone. He's gone.
Season 3, then. I think this season has its ups and downs. It's got a couple of episodes that I would say, Jacob, you probably agree are some of the worst in Lost's history, but it also has absolutely some of the best episodes in Lost's history, doesn't it? What do you think of season 3?
Now, because of what you've just said, season 3 is one of my favourites because it showcases the worst and the best of not just Lost, but just kind of like the process of network television and the idea of churning out TV. And because of that, it's such a fascinating season of TV. How you can start something, it doesn't start bad, but it kind of, like you say, there are a handful of episodes where you're like, this is, I don't want to say scraping the barrel because I still think a bad Lost episode is a good episode by other standards, but like not as good as it had been in season 1 and 2. But then on the back half, wow.
Amazing.
And the reason why that is because, and I'm sure you are very well aware of this, but it's David Lindelof and Carlton Cuse wanted to end the show. They knew it was this phenomenon that ABC would keep renewing as long as it was getting the views. But they knew that if they kept continuing it, the views would dip because the quality would lessen. So they navigated their way to a deal to end the show, and they had an ending they wanted to drop the moment they knew how many episodes they had left. And this was unthought of at the time. Like, you know, Game of Thrones ended on its own merits pretty much because Lost was able to show that you could do that and do it successfully. And now every show is like one season and done, whereas Lost was the first to really do it. So I think from the moment they got the deal, you could, even watching Lost, you could probably tell the episode because there was an urgency in the writing that there hadn't been.
Yes.
And
and before thrilling. That, it really is treading water, isn't it? This idea of, oh my God, how much longer can we keep doing these 24 episode seasons and keep dragging out? The low point that obviously famously people talk about is we get a flashback episode about Jack's tattoos, basically, which is generally considered one of the worst episodes of the show.
The butt of the joke, isn't it? That episode.
And we get that brilliant episode. What are their names? The two peripheral characters that get their own episode.
See, this is fascinating as well. This is another reason why season 3 is great. They're Nikki and Paolo.
That's it, Nikki and Paolo.
So like we were mentioning earlier, like you saw things kind of addressed in real time, like fan reactions, like within the same season. Nikki and Paolo were basically the top of the heap there because they were introduced, as you say, everyone despised that you were meant to believe they'd been there the entire time, just as these like faceless survivors. And it's
a really fun idea, I think.
Do you know
like
what?
A fun experiment.
You can't blame them for trying because obviously, why wouldn't it work? But for some reason, it was just like seeing them just be like, Hurley, what's going on here? These people we hadn't seen. You were like, fuck off. No, who are you? So 10 episodes time, Damon and Carlton realised that they had to kind of correct the error, and they basically did Expose, which was one of, I know it's a very divisive episode, but it's a brilliant episode that ultimately kills off Nikki and Paolo, but in the most imaginative, fun way.
Really fun.
Talk about turning a negative into just a classic positive.
Absolutely. This really fun idea that the show is getting really good at this point of blindsiding the audience by showing what's previously happened, but from a different perspective, right? Like we got the other 48 days or whatever it's called in season 2. We get the Nikki and Paolo, and the amazing opening of season 3 where you've got this new blonde woman that we've never seen before, and she's in her house and she's in a nice little suburban street and she goes to book club and she's putting on some music on a CD and something's going on with her, but we're not sure what. Then suddenly there is this almighty explosion. We look up, we see a plane crashing in the sky, and we discover that there's this whole like town, it looks like, in the middle of the island, right? Like, I think that reveal is almost as good as the Desmond in the Hatch reveal. It's so good.
It just like made it so that like, oh, okay, premiere episodes of Lost are gonna deliver. The opening scenes anyway. And And they do by and large, but definitely up there as one of my favourites is this scene.
What would you say? So if season 1 was kind of about, the surviving and being on the beach, and season 2 was about the hatch, what would you say is the crux of what season 3 is all
I think
about?
that is very much the other season, but like learning who they are and their history to the island, with Ben and Juliet as like the linchpin, I guess. But also about Jack's, well, not just Jack, but this desire to let's actually try and leave this island.
Yeah.
Let's not just rest on our laurels, which comes in the second half of the season, which coincides with the writers being like, hey, can we finish this?
Time to wrap things up.
Because they know what they've got planned for 4, 5, and 6. So that's season 3.
It's pretty great, all of that stuff, right? And Juliet as this new character we're introduced to, who is part of the others, who's been on this island for several years. Quite a mystery at the beginning until we find out a bit more about her, right?
Yeah.
I've heard you say, Jacob, is she your favourite character on the show?
She is, and I used to think that was like an unpopular opinion or not a common one, but as it's gone on, and as time's gone on, I've spoken to people, she is universally loved as a character. And again, like you said, it's like this slippery character who, through backstory and Elizabeth Mitchell's performance, because she's got to do so many things in season 3, like
oh my God,
early on,
does.
that you just don't know what she's thinking. She doesn't even know what she's thinking. That for her to end the show in the most heroic way is so vindicating, and she is everything I love about Lost in one character.
Yeah,
Juliet.
I agree. She's a brilliant character. She's a bit like Locke in that she's sad. Like, she's got such a tragic story, hasn't she?
And I'm a sucker for that. I think those characters, the tragic characters, maybe that's kind of part of why I love them. But like that aspect is a pull for me.
So good. And this is the thing, I think season 3 finally kind of, like you say, it gives us a bit of info about who the others are. It humanizes the others, right? Because with the focus mainly on Juliet and Ben, we get Ben's backstory and how when he was a little boy, he was taken to the island. He was part of the Dharma Initiative, and he actually killed a bunch of people in order to become the leader of the others. Whereas Juliet has got this tragic backstory where she was her sister was dying of cancer. She was a scientist, and she was promised that if she comes to this island and helps them with their scientific research, they'll find a way to cure her sister's cancer, right? But what happens is she's taken there, she's manipulated by Ben, and she's basically kept on that island against her will. She's stuck there, essentially, right? So even though at the beginning of the season, she seems shady and mysterious, and Jack and our main characters don't trust her, and we don't trust her, we actually learn a bit more about her, and actually we find out that she is this incredibly human, compassionate person who is stuck in this dire situation. And the exchanges between her and Ben, and the way in which Ben treats her in this season, it's brilliant, it's heartbreaking, it's terrifying, right?
Why are you scared?
I'm not scared.
Why are you scared, Ben? You said no one on this island ever had cancer. You told me that.
I know what I told you,
You told
Julia.
me you could fix it. You said that. You said that you cured my sister. You lied to me.
No, I did not lie to you.
If you can cure cancer, Ben, then why do you have it?
I don't know.
I want to talk to her. I want to talk to Rachel. I want to talk to her now.
It's not going to happen, Juliet, but I can promise you that Rachel is fine.
You never cured her.
I did.
You're a liar.
No, Juliet.
You lied to me.
I told you the truth.
And I associate Juliet with my favourite sort of section of Lost. Like, I would say for me, from the midway point in season 3 where they know it's ending until the incident at the end of season 5, that 2.5 season stretch for me is when I think the show is at the best it can be. Like, that's my favourite stuff on the show. Up until we basically say goodbye to Juliet, that's my favourite section of the show, I think. It's so good from this point onwards. It's just got such momentum, hasn't it, I think?
Totally. And I think, like, I said at the beginning that, a lot of people would listen to you who didn't finish Lost and go, really? That's wild. The fact is, like, Lost in its early days was getting Emmy nominations. And I know these days, especially, an Emmy nomination, it means nothing because they just nominate the same old shit. But they also nominate good stuff as well. But they do nominate shows that don't necessarily deserve to be nominated. But in that day, a show like Lost getting an Emmy nomination was kind of rare. And it got it in the early days, and then it just didn't for whatever reason. But, 4 and 5 got a sea of Emmy nominations. People, they were acclaimed and considered very good. And season 4 was a victim of the writer's strike at the time in 2008, would it have been?
Yeah.
But like, you know, I say victim. Lost was actually one of the ones that spun it into a positive.
Agreed.
Because season 4, as you say, it really benefits from the shorter episode count.
It really does. So we'll move on to season 4 shortly, but we've got to talk about, Jacob, the season 3 finale, right? Which is called Through the Looking Glass, a kind of game changer for Lost and a sort of game changer in television.
Like you say, not just Lost, in TV. Everyone who watched it live remembered where they were at this moment. Everyone who didn't watch Lost or, you know, heard about this moment and thought, wow, that's how you change the DNA of a show.
Phenomenal.
Just like an adrenaline shot right into the heart of Lost.
So, as a reminder for people, right, it looks, we've got all kinds of crazy shit going on the island. Like they're on their way to potentially getting off the island. Like there's all stuff going on with people arriving on a freighter and like all this other stuff. Charlie is going like through his big final arc.
Of course.
All of that shit's going on. It's super exciting. And then meanwhile, we've got these what look like flashbacks, and you're like, oh, here we go. It's a Jack flashback episode. I remember thinking that. I was like, oh, for fuck's sake. It's Jack being sad. He's got a beard. He's drinking a lot. And you just assume this is some part of his backstory where he was a bit sad and he was going through some stuff with his dad and all this. And then this incredible moment at the end where he arranges to meet somebody. That somebody turns out to be Kate. And you're like, hang on, what? These two didn't know each other. And it's this amazing, really beautifully done reveal that this whole time we've been watching for the first time on Lost a flash forward, right, rather than a flashback.
Yeah.
And he is saying we have to go back. And you're just like, what the fuck does that mean? So we know at the end of season 3 that Jack and Kate do get off the island. We know that this is heading somewhere real, right? And like, what an amazing way to end that season.
It's just like, even now, it just blows my mind that they must have, at one point, someone must have suggested that idea, and they would have gone like pens down. They would have gone, we are sitting on probably the biggest moment in TV. Like, if we do this right, and they did it right. And the finale, you say in general, is a magnificent finale, but that ending just takes it to the next level of being an all-timer, to the point now that when I look at, and I know people love The Constant in season 4, which I'm sure we'll talk about, as a standalone episode Lost, but when you, in the discussion of greatest finales of all time, any top 5 list without the season 3 finale of Lost on it is redundant. It is redundant.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, yeah, and I think it also goes back to the idea of how important Lost is in television history, right? Like this, like you said, this third season is such a fascinating case study of the kind of transition between network television and this more kind of prestige television that was more creator and auteur led, right? Because like you said, that moment midway through season 3 when we're just treading water, when Damon and Carlton were churning out new stories of the week just to keep this show going because they didn't know how long it might go on for, to then finally getting complete sort of what they wanted out of it, which is persuading the networks to say, yes, you can have 3 more seasons and then it will end. So this moment in season 3 is not just so important to the story of Lost, but it feels like a kind of important moment in television in that regard too, that, you know, from this point onwards, we were getting shorter television shows, shorter run times. Television was changing, right? It wasn't just let's keep a story going on and on and on indefinitely and figure out new adventures of the week. From this point onwards, and we'll talk about this through seasons 4, 5, and 6, there is this momentum where we know we are hurtling towards an endpoint, right? And yeah, for it to do this in this really clever way that flips the format on its head and sort of says, right, no more flashbacks, now it's flash forwards, now we are using sort of this interesting way in which Lost is formatted in a way to kind of tease where this show is headed. It was just genius, and it's a really emotional character moment too. Like, it kind of ticks all the boxes.
We were not supposed to leave.
Yes, we were. Goodbye, Jack.
have to go back, Kate. We have to go back!
And in true Lost style, we're going to leave it there on a cliffhanger, because that's it for the first half of our epic Lost discussion. Stay tuned, we'll be back again very soon for the second half of my discussion with the brilliant Jacob Stolworthy as we talk about seasons 4, 5 and 6 and that incredible ending and the lasting legacy of Lost. Join us again soon for another bonus episode of the evolution of horror.